All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and start. So, all right. So I'm Brent Huston, and we're going to talk tonight a little bit about realizing your hacker heritage. So if you came for either one of two things, you're probably in the wrong place. If you came for a technical talk, that's probably not, you're not in the right place. If you came for a PowerPoint demo to see like all the features that PowerPoint can do, you're probably also not in the right place. I'm just giving you a heads up, right? Being fair. So I'm usually that honeypot guy, and people have lately started calling me kind of the cyber hippie. So in fitting in with some of that, I really wanted to take a little bit and talk about what I think are some of the most important things that we as a community face. And so I'm glad you all joined me. This is the beginning of a grassroots program, clearly. So as of now, you're all generals in my army. That's great. So you've been promoted. So I want to start with owning the hacker mythos. Over the years, we've heard all of these things, all of these stories about folks getting mistreated and called names. And I think a lot of us here, how many folks were picked on in high school because you were smart? Some of us. Okay. Some of us not, right? And so we were called names. And so I want to take those names back first. So I'm going to say the word, and then I'd like you guys to shout the word so that we can show that we own those words, okay? So let's start with nerd. Nerd. All right, let's next go to geek. Geek. And then let's do dork. Zork. Somebody said Zork. See, that's awesome. Okay? Now, I ask you to take those words back because they sort of, for years and years, they were words that were used to separate us from the rest of society. And it was like as if in the beginning days, there were geeks and nerds and everybody else, right? And so we were sort of false outsiders. We belonged when they needed something, and we didn't belong when they didn't. And I'm here to tell you, though, that it's important that we own that myth. Because there's also another side to the hacker myth. How many folks have heard the myth of two guys starting a business in a garage and turning that into the largest company on the planet? How many folks have heard about hacking in the sense of the MIT use of the word? Okay? So there's a whole nother myth around being a hacker besides those words that separate us. Now, part of the problem that I would say to you is that we've empowered the use of those words to separate us. And I want us to not see ourselves as separate. In fact, I would argue that there's a whole bunch of reasons why we shouldn't be. The first one is, the war's over, and we won, right? Today, geeks and smart people run the planet. If you look at the list of the most wealthy people on the planet, the most powerful people on the planet, your heroes are at the top of those lists. So, the war is over. There's not a whole lot left to rebel against, but yet every time I go to a hacker convention or I sit down with a bunch of geeks, they still persist in trying to live outside of the rest of society. It's like we want to self-reinforce that separation. And I call on you to not do that because high school's over. We can go and lead. And we can go and take our skills and our knowledge and put them to use for everyone so that all of us benefit. And it's okay to be smart. So how many folks in here think that you're smart? Okay? How many folks in here think that you're smarter than the average? Okay? How many folks realize what the average is? Okay? Maybe you need to re-examine what the average is. Because when I talk to folks around here, I do see that there's a lot of different skill sets. And I think it's important that we value those skill sets, that we value the myth that we've built, because that is the story that all of us are living every day. We're living that myth. So I want to take you back, and I know the 80s are a long time ago, right? So how many folks, since there's such a small group, how many folks remember the 80s? Okay, Bill, you don't count. You don't really remember the 80s.
I was there.
You were there. You were there.
Is that enough?
That's enough. So if you think back to the 80s, there was this magazine called Mondo 2000. How many folks sort of ever read Mondo or know what I'm talking about? Okay. Mondo 2000 was sort of pre-Wired. It was geeks, it was a full-color geek magazine before there were really cool geek magazines. Right? It was an actual print magazine, right? And it was written by a guy, aproposly named, Are You Serious? Okay, that's what he called himself. And he led this magazine that talked about, sort of from the 80s point of view, what technology was going to become and what the world would be like when everything was connected, what the digital world would be like in the year 2000. Now, some of that was corny, right? Some of it was glass shoes with fish swimming around in it, right? You had a pair. It's okay. You're recovering. And some of it was really true. Mobile phones. There was a whole bunch of articles on the idea that we were going to be connected all the time with these little boxes that we would carry around. But how many folks have that today, right? Okay, so it was really interesting. Well, what was more interesting about that to me was he came up with this whole set of what he called the hacker rules, like the hacker covenant. And in that was the final one, yield to the hands-on imperative. Now, when I read yield to the hands-on imperative, that really was the beginning of me believing in empirical data and the fact that we should make rational decisions based on data. So today, I would say that now that we are not separate, and if we can own the myth, and if we can be a contributing part of society in ways that are immeasurable, then we should realize that by yielding to the hands-on imperative. And those folks who have gone before us, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all the way to Mitnick and HD and those guys, we owe them and their heritage, the gifts that they've given, the work that they've done. And so I call on all of you to participate in some meaningful way in the community, engage, and make your contribution. So if we do that and we realize that we can make those changes, then what do? So I talk about this because I think right now many of us, particularly hackers and folks that are involved in the security community, we're stuck in what I've come to call the fastest path to root syndrome. And I think we're all infected with it. Now, FPTRS won't go away. By the way, what's that sound like? FPTRS won't go away if you get a shot. You can't rub a cream or an ointment on and make it stop, okay? It requires a change in thinking. And part of that change in thinking, I think, comes from the fact that we're wasting a whole lot of that mental energy. We're wasting a whole lot of brain cycles, right? So I'd start with, I think we're spending way too much time recreating tools. So this is sort of the beginnings of it. How many port scanners do we need? Can you really improve on Nmap with a new Nmap? Right? But somewhere, right now, there are hackers contributing brain cycles to rewriting Nmap in some arcane language that's going to shave off a 15th of a millisecond in scanning a cider block. Right? Do we need that as a community? Is it a worthwhile exercise? Or could we take those brain cycles and use them for something more creative, more constructive? I think that's a big question that we should be asking. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't innovate. I'm not saying that we shouldn't continue to create new security tools, but I'm thinking that we don't really need 5 different models of a hammer. If you look at the hammer, it's been a hammer for a long time. Making a new hammer that drives a nail 15 seconds faster isn't really helpful. So that's sort of point number 1. Number 2 is I think we're stuck in the cycle of proving the obvious. How many folks think you could root a box? Okay. How many think that you could probably get admin in a network attack? How many folks think you could probably social engineer a user out of a password? Okay, so if we all know this to be true, and we believe it, we see it, we have yield to the hands-on imperative data to show us, do we really need to restate it over and over and over again in innumerable ways? Okay? But that's exactly what we're doing. We're spending time in cycles getting better at something that we already know how to do to the nth degree. And we've hit the point where the plateau, the return on investment's been reached. So I guess my point here would be, let's take some of that brain power. Certainly vulnerability work might continue, but if you're out there just reiterating the obvious, it might be time to take some of that brain power and do something else. So to quote one of the movies that they were showing over here, I would suggest that we take those brain cycles and we learn to hack the planet. This comes from Acid Burn and Serial Killer, who was my favorite, by the way, in that movie, the stoner guy, hippie guy, go figure. And Crash Override from the movie Hackers. And besides, they all throw their hands in and you sync up their swatches and I don't know, whatever else, tune their rollerblades, because you guys all rollerblade, right? So all hackers apparently do that. They all chant this little mantra, hack the planet. Now, in other subcultures, they have something called do the needful. And so do the needful is sort of this thing. We have to take those brain cycles and figure out what's going to benefit us. What can we actually get from those brain cycles? And how can we use them to help all of us? And it seems to me that as a hacker, we're standing at a time in a human time frame where we could use a lot of smart, right? We've spent a lot of time looking for the fountain of youth, and I wonder if maybe we shouldn't have been looking for the fountain of smart, because we could use that. So what is the needful? Well, I think if you go out and look at what are the big problems, the things that are coming on the horizon that we know we're going to have to deal with, and the things that we already see today that we know we have to deal with, those are the things that we probably should apply some brain power to. And so I try to abstract these. These are uber high level sorts of the 4 problems. But I think as a populace, we can agree that there are really 4 issues. We have to figure out water, where fresh water is going to come from, how we're going to manage it. Because right now, outside of this hotel, we've got water spraying in fountains. I went to a park the other day where kids were running in water fountains that are just spraying water. There were no kids, but gallons and gallons of water being pumped and pumped and pumped. And yet, less than half the planet away, people are dying for the need of it. And so I think that's a problem that we can address. We can start to think about, take some of that hacker ingenuity and think about how can we better use water. The second one is energy. We're struggling as a populace with where are we going to get energy? How are we going to manage it over time? And I think that some of the smartest people in the world are right here in this hotel. And if we could take some of that brain power, we might be able to figure out how to make energy. We might be able to figure out how to power our needs without destroying our lives. And so I'd like to see us do some of that. The third one's always touchy. People get bent out of shape and they kill each other over this, but planetary population is another problem. It's one of the big four. We're about to have more people than we can feed, and we don't know where they're going to live. We don't know what their impact is going to be on our planet. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of us become birth control experts, although some of us perhaps might want to do that. But I think that we could help solve problems or help work on the problem of population. After all, we are pretty good at the math that's involved in estimating resource consumption. And then the last one, regardless of your political stance, is really climate change. I think all of us understand that something is changing in the world. And I think it's important that we apply some brain cells to solving some of those problems that we're going to face. Things like climate refugees, right? If island nations around the belt of the world, around the equator, become uninhabitable, where are those people going to live? How are we going to take care of them? And it's our generation, it's our group, and it's going to be our problem that we need to solve. So I think we should start working on it. Now, when I've given this talk before, what I hear is, how can I do that? How can I help? I'm not a scientist, I'm not a politician. Insert your excuse here as to why. But I think even though we aren't politicians and scientists, we are hackers. We have brain power, and we can probably still help. For example, we can help folks create better systems to make water and power go further. We can help them secure those systems from tampering, so that water supplies and power supplies and food supplies are not interrupted. We can take some of those tool generation and coding skills that we have and help the folks that are doing some of this work create better tools to make them more efficient and more effective. Right? So even though you may not be able to stand up with a microscope and review whether or not water is pure, you have the skills and the brain power necessary to help folks develop systems to do just that. I think the other piece of that is you can learn to participate in the peer review process. So even if you're not a scientist, one of the things of how science works is the data gets reviewed by peers. And so folks are out there sort of always looking at findings and revamping processes and approaches. Well, the very hacker perspective, our heritage, what we're good at, what used to separate us from everyone else, is that we're good at data. We're good at analysis. So let's use some of those skills and let's be a peer. You may not know or understand the mathematics of molecular science, but maybe your odd view or your ability to spot anomalies or outliers could lead to a breakthrough. So I would urge you to get engaged in the processes. If you don't do anything yourself, get involved in open source science and work with them to help them help us. Now, a lot of folks say, oh, well, that's nice, Brent. You got on a Grateful Dead t-shirt and you got up here and talked about peace and love and all that stuff. But I'm here because I want to tell you about two examples of using some of these skills. So the first one is a tool called WaterTrack. And WaterTrack is a tool that was developed. It's a web-based solution. It also uses mobile devices. And it was coded in our spare time. I'm a member of the team that did it. We try to stay anonymous, and I asked them basically if I could come out and talk about it. But the group, we coded these two products, and the first one is WaterTrack. So what WaterTrack does, it's in use in South America and in parts of Africa today. It integrates with smartphones, and it uses the GPS functionality of smartphones to allow users to flag locations of potable water sources in the desert. And that potable water source is backed up by a trust mechanism so that the more people who flag that that water is there the higher the trust score goes for the water source. Now, we're really lucky. We live in an industrialized nation. We can walk to the tap and flip a switch and out comes water. But in many cases, people spend weeks, days of their life obtaining drinking water. So this is a very simple tool. It took literally a team of 3 people, nights and weekends, and it took us about 6 weeks to code the initial version. It took us about 6 months to find the right people to get this in play. And it's been in use now for a little over a year and a half. And there are people now actually using it to track potable water sources and identify ways to get drinking water. The second example is a tool called LifeCast. And same team of folks. In this case, we also had a 4th person who came in and helped. The LifeCast product is an SMS broadcast product. And how many folks here remember the tsunami in Indonesia? Okay. So that tsunami led to the idea that there needed to be a rapid mechanism for allowing folks to understand that they were in danger. And so what we did, a group of us got together, and again, nights and weekends, we coded up an SMS gateway product, and we made that available at no charge to the ISP folks, the folks that manage cellular networks over there. And they put it into use for notifying folks immediately of an impending sort of issue, like a tsunami, an earthquake, how they could get help. It turns out that almost all those folks had cell phones, and that the cell network remained stable most of that time. So that sort of became a mechanism to save lives. Now, I tell you those 2 stories because that's an example of 4 people in the case of LifeCast, 3 people in the case of WaterTrack. We sat down, talked it out, built a plan, and in weeks we had something that was functional. Now, was it completely functional and secure and fully baked as a product? No, but the people who were finding water with it don't care. Right? They don't care whether or not the screen is blue or whether there was usability testing. Okay? So that's the sort of story that I would urge you guys to do and get involved in. That's where a small investment on your part can have huge return on other people's lives. And personally, I have nothing against writing exploits or code. I think it's a great thing, or attack tools. But if I had the choice of writing Nmap better to shave 15 seconds off a cider block scan, or saving the lives of some people in another country who maybe need help, I think I'd probably remake WaterTrack. So that's just my example. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to invest time in code, and you think really you'd like to just play with science and maybe take a stab at finding out how to generate energy in an unexpected way, I'd urge you to do that. Take a stab at it. One of the interesting things when I started to prep for this talk was I went back and looked at just how often these sort of unexpected changes occurred in infrastructure research. It turns out that a lot of really good ideas came from people who weren't scientists, right? Who weren't necessarily engaged in the specific area of focus or research that they were doing. They were sort of oddities and one-offs, and they came at the problem with a different perspective. Isn't that what hackers do? Isn't that what we do every day? We look at things differently than other folks. So maybe if we just take a stab at it, maybe we'll solve it. After all, the science says that unexpected breakthroughs are somewhat expected. There's a return on investment. There is a hands-on imperative. So now that we have this power, we acknowledge it, we own the mythos, we're no longer separate from society. If we decide that we're going to lead, leading comes with power and it comes with responsibility. How many folks ever saw Spider-Man? So my favorite thing about Spider-Man, right, Spider-Man was awesome, was that Uncle Ben always told him great power came with great responsibility. And now all of you are Spider-Man. You all have great power, but you also all have great responsibility. And so how we use that power is now up to you. It's not up to me, it's up to you. It's up to every one of us. And what will we do with it? Will we make a change? Will we make more exploits? Will we continue to state the obvious that you can ask a user for a password and get it? Or will we actually take our brains and our skills and do something meaningful for all of us? That's my question. And I guess I would leave you with this. How many folks have children? What do you want to tell your children that you did with your skills? What's the gift that you want to leave them? And those of you who are young folks and don't have children, or maybe aren't planning to have children, but if you're sitting in the audience and you're the youngster thinking about how are you going to spend your career? What are you going to do for the next 20 years? What do you want us to do? What's the gift that we can give you? And then from that, what's the gift that you can give the next generation? That's my question. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I would urge all of you to realize your hacker heritage and take those skills, honor our myth, and learn to hack tomorrow, because that is the really, really cool thing. So if you want to follow me on Twitter and hear some more cyber hippie stuff, or talk a little bit about exploiting, or even if you want to talk about writing the next best Nmap, you can find me there. That's how you reach me. So thank you all for coming, and I'll take your questions.
So I think to brush something off on your big four problems, there's a lot of money involved in keeping energy production the way that it is now, not changing it. And one of the problems that I think would be helpful to include in there is taking down parts of the current infrastructure system that are involved in keeping that the way it is. Not like, not like hacking the companies and like doing something illegally, but like how to infiltrate and take over that infrastructure or something to make an incentive for changing.
So the question for the video is from the audience is how that I left greed basically off of the big four, and that there is a lack of an incentive program currently for incenting change in things like energy. So my response to that is this: number one, I had to come up with a way to abstract all of our human problems to four. Or at least a small number. I agree that greed is a problem, but I think it's a part of the energy problem, it's a part of the water problem, it's a part of all those four problems. So I didn't include it esoterically as separate. But my response to the lack of an incentive is twofold. Number one, to be a little flippant, so fix it. Make it an incentive. Stop buying stuff from companies that you don't agree with, right? And if enough of us do it, maybe they'll do something different. Now, the not so flippant answer, right, is you talked about creating campaigns for change. Well, that's what we do. We're hackers. We have at our possession a set of tools that are force multipliers. We're good at creating and using multimedia. We're really good at using social media. We're good at creating connections. We're good at applying pressure. If we can take a company, release an exploit, and get them to patch this huge piece of monolithic code, you're telling me that we can't come up with some way to apply pressure to the energy providers? We need to do that. And I'm not encouraging I'm certainly not encouraging anyone to go out and deface websites and hack the power grid, but I'm saying that as a group, we can socially organize in ways that we can apply pressure. And I think we need to figure it out that we can do that.
You can show better ways to
We can show better ways. We can, and frankly, from their side, we can show them that if we can improve their processes, they can actually make money while making it better, right? And who better to think of those solutions than hackers? So that's it. Next question. Other questions? All right, I'm the last speaker on Saturday night, so thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, and I'm here if you have any questions. Otherwise, the beer is free tonight on Rapid 7, so go out there and spend some of HD's money. It's awesome. You guys take care.